The principal of the orphanage led me to two guys who were holding hands. He said it was Sam and Mark, my new dads. I tried to look surprised, as if seeing them for the first time. After all, this was all part of our plan with the guys. The principal handed over my documents to the fathers, and I got into the smart sports car of my friends, Handsome Sam and Brutal Mark. We were in the car, and I was so happy. I broke out of the orphanage, and now I was free. Since childhood, I remembered only a strict schedule, the same uniform, and the most terrible thing, the minute-by-minute supervision of the teachers. How I dreamed of immersing myself in a life full of freedom, expensive things, and parties. But time passed, and I was still stuck in the orphanage. And when I was desperate, I met two guys on the internet, Mark and Sam. They had been best friends since childhood, even sharing a Facebook account. Mark was so bold, so brutal, but Sam was a handsome guy, every girl's dream. We texted for hours, and I could only envy their life. Cool clubs, expensive clothes. And so, 2 weeks ago, when I was once again yelled at by the teachers, I called Mark and Sam in tears. I was saying I hated this place, and then Sam said he thought he had an idea. His lawyer friend would forge their marriage registration papers, and he and Mark would pretend to be a couple and adopt me. Then I would be able to leave the orphanage. And now our plan had succeeded. Now I was heading in a cool car straight to a new life. But then Mark braked abruptly. Have we arrived? Wow, what a house! It was a real castle with a pool on the roof. As soon as we were inside, Handsome Sam handed me a golden card. Are you sure this is for me? He added that it was an unlimited card. I started thinking, was it just like that? Although we were friends. I was going to run to the mall right now and buy everything there, but just as I was out in the yard, Mark yelled at me to be home for dinner. He wanted to talk to me. Come on, I'll make it. I didn't know where to look first in the store. There were so many cool things here. After shopping, I went to a restaurant and ordered the most expensive dishes. God, I've never eaten so good. I was so carried away that I didn't get home until late in the afternoon. I completely forgot about the dinner Mark was talking about. But Mark immediately complained that we were already late for the case. I stared at him in surprise. What kind of case was this? Oh yes, I remember something like that. Brutal Mark and Handsome Sam looked at each other maliciously. I didn't understand anything. Then Sam said coldly, "It's time for you to find out about our business." The tone made me feel creepy. The guys gathered around me and quietly said that they earned money from thefts. So that's where they got the money. Mark added that they had been in the business for a long time, and for new robberies, they needed someone small and agile, just like you. Handsome Sam said slowly. Was this a joke? But the guys fled with each other to tell me that I would have so much money that I could buy anything I wanted. I thought about it. I realized that I was in trouble and there was no way back. Or rather, there was, but it led to the orphanage. Then Handsome Sam chuckled. Look, you're thinking, you're not all that right. Yes, of course. I hated the rules with all my heart. Besides, who didn't want easy money? So guys, I'm in. At midnight, we got in the car. We're going to rob a jewelry store today, Handsome Sam said. Wow, this was really crazy. I played along with the guys and was just in shock from what was happening. And then Brutal Mark turned to me in a terrible bull mask. Handsome Sam handed me similar to it. He said it was their thing and it was necessary for conspiracy. I immediately pulled it over my head, and at that moment, I experienced a strange feeling, a sense of freedom. I liked that feeling. I didn't obey anyone, not even the law. We got out of the jewelry store, and I looked around in amazement. This was the coolest part of the city. They were just nuts. But Brutal Mark abruptly told me to focus. I needed to get inside the store and open the door for them from the inside. But how? Handsome Sam said they'd thought it all out. There was ventilation above the jewelry room. I would get into the room through it. That's it? You can be sure I can handle it. I kept getting into the taste. While the guys unscrewed the gate around the corner of the building, I looked at the window. What gorgeous diamonds. But Mark called out that everything was ready, and I went over to them. The ventilation system stank wildly. How gross. But I whispered to Sam that after the case, I could pick up any earrings. This was my dream. So, despite my disgust, I went inside anyway. I couldn't get enough air from the cramped space, and suddenly something furry ran down my arm. God, the rat! I flinched and touched a ventilation hatch underneath me. It opened and I immediately fell down. No! I managed to grab something and hung right over the shop floor. I looked down and I noticed red laser arm lines all over the room. God, if I brush against them, we're dead. I frantically looked around the room and noticed a nearby sofa for visitors. There were no rays there. I hoped I was strong enough. I swayed and jumped on it. Oh God. I was just like a real spy. Then I crawled past the lasers to the door and opened the lock. Bruno went to the alarm panel, entered some password, and the lasers in the hall went out. They were really pros. Then he shoved the bag into my hands and told me to go to the cash register to take out the money, and they would take care of the shop window. Wow, I opened the cash register and was finally overwhelmed by a wave of delight. Damn, I'm so cool, and now it's all ours. But then I looked up and saw that Mark had touched the shop window, and a second later, the alarm went off. It seems they then turned everything off. Let's get out! Mark shouted in exasperation. The euphoria and romance left me abruptly. I was just numb at the thought of being taken to prison. Sam grabbed me and dragged me to the car. We drove at full speed, and I still couldn't catch my breath. We were on the verge of going to jail. I couldn't sleep a wink all night. I needed to get out of here before I ended up in jail. I quickly began to pack my things in my backpack, and I would take that bag of money from the jewelry store. I almost died because of it. I crept into Mark's room and started looking for it. Man, where's the bag? I accidentally hit a tin can and it clattered under the bed. God, if Mark woke up now, I would be dead. I pressed myself against the wall, but I think I was okay. And then I noticed the handle of the bag. I grabbed it and crawled to the door. Freedom was only a few steps away. I opened the door. That's it. Done. Yes! Suddenly I heard Mark's voice behind me. Then he grabbed my arm. I tried to explain myself as I went along, but Mark said angrily that if I tried to run away, they would turn me into the cops as a criminal. What? How dare you? Mark pressed me against the wall and continued. They would say that since my arrival, valuable things had started to disappear from the house. And who would they believe? Them or a hooligan girl from an orphanage? I wanted to cry from impotence. He threw me into the room and said we had a new case tonight. We would clean out the fashion store. The guys locked me in my room for the day. It was unbearable. In the evening, Mark dragged me back to the car. There were tears in my eyes. This was not the freedom I dreamed of. We drove up to the store and Mark said I should spray paint the cameras, and if I tried to do something, they would hurt me. Brutal Mark easily opened the lock, and we went into the store. Wow, there were such huge balls here. I glanced at the door, but Mark pushed me sharply toward the cameras. I waited for the brutal Mark to move away and began waving my hands at the camera. I wish someone would notice me and save me. But then Sam turned around and asked me how I was doing. I frantically began to spray paint on the camera, and then I got an idea. What if I just pretended to paint over the cameras? Then the guys would be spotted and put in jail, and I wouldn't have to help them anymore. I only needed to choose the moment and pull off their masks. Then the camera would capture their faces. So I did. The guys were so busy raking money out of the cash register that they didn't even notice anything. There was no time to delay, so I jumped up to Handsome Sam and was about to pull off his mask when he suddenly twisted my arm. I screamed at the sharp pain, but he covered my mouth. And at that moment, Handsome Sam noticed that the cameras were not painted over. He was furious. Oh no, they understood. I ran for the exit, but Brutal Mark blocked my path. My heart was pounding. Brutal Mark angrily hissed that I decided to set them up for the second time, and they did not forgive this. And then I noticed an alarm button on the wall. I reached out and pressed it, but nothing happened. The next thing I knew, Mark was grabbing me and tying me up, and then taping my mouth shut. The guys dragged me to the car through the back door and threw me in the trunk. I was sitting in the trunk. Awesome. My freedom ended before it even started. Apparently, it served me right. I played too much and crossed the line, and they would probably dump me in some lake somewhere. My sad thoughts were interrupted by the sharp sound of sirens. It was the cops. The button worked. I heard one of them approach the guys and ask something, but Sam innocently replied that they had just arrived. I pounded on the trunk door as hard as I could, but no one hurt me. Judging by the footsteps, the cops were already leaving. Heck, I braced myself and kicked the inside of the taillight. It worked! I knocked it out and managed to stick my hand through the hole from the taillight. The guys had already started the car. Sam pulled away and we drove off. Everything inside me collapsed. Now it was definitely over. Images from the orphanage began to flash through my mind, and for a moment, I even felt warmer in my heart. Heck, I would give anything to have everything back as it was. Suddenly, the car turned sharply somewhere and stopped. What happened? Someone opened the trunk and I was immediately blinded by the light of a flashlight. No, don't touch me, I shouted. It was the cops. Looks like I just got lucky. But at the police station, one of the cops came up to me and said cheerfully, "Well done. You know the first rule of kidnapping. Knock out the taillight from the inside and call for help." He saw me, went after the car, and saved me from Mark and Sam. It turned out that the cops had been looking for these bull gang robbers for a long time. Then I burst into tears. Was this nightmare finally over? Was I really free? A week later, I came to the court to give evidence. I breathed a sigh of relief when I heard that Mark and Sam were going to jail. At the exit, the teacher from the orphanage was waiting for me. I was wildly happy to see her and rushed to hug her. She was extremely surprised by my behavior. You know, during this adventure, I realized that freedom was not fashion boutiques, earrings, and certainly not crimes. Being free means learning responsibility and appreciating what you already have. Think about it. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you. I quickly locked myself in my room to send a text message to my beloved Carlos. In an hour, I would run to him from this orphanage. Carlos wrote that he would meet me at the border with Mexico, but he would have to take a lot of risks and the cops could catch him at any moment. I was hastily packing my suitcase when the nanny came into the room. "You were adopted," she said solemnly. "Get ready. We're going to visit your new family right now." 5 minutes later, we went out into the orphanage's yard, and I deliberately hesitated at the car, and when the nanny got behind the wheel, I ran as fast as I could from the territory. "Carlos, my love, wait for me." Oops, there were angry guards around the corner. They instantly pinned me down and dragged me back to the car. Once I was inside, the nanny locked the doors and grinned slyly. "Do what you want. I'll run away anyway," I thought. All the way, the nanny didn't stop talking. She kept saying how lucky I was because such nasty girls rarely found a home. And that my new parents were good people, albeit with their own characteristics. What does that mean? The nanny didn't have time to answer me. We arrived. On the threshold of a huge house stood 5 guys. Was I adopted into the army? The tallest of them opened the car door for me, and the other, a fit jock, took things out of the trunk. The others just stood there and stared at me. The nanny immediately left and I was left alone among this bunch of guys. We met. Tallville and Jock Pete turned out to be a sweet couple, and at the same time, my new parents. And the other 3 guys were their adopted children. Wow. I needed to get out of this madhouse. I casually tried to take my bag from Dad Pete, but he said he would take my things to my room. Phil asked for my passport and added that they kept all the family's documents in a safe. I didn't want to give my passport. How could I cross the border without it? But Dad Phil looked very stern, and I didn't want to argue. "I'm sorry, Carlos. I didn't think I could escape today." Then lunch was waiting for me. The kitchen table was already set. As soon as I sat down, Mikey, the smallest of the brothers, immediately began to bombard me with questions. Leave me alone. If my passport hadn't been taken away, I'd be in Carlos' arms by now, not listening to this bullshit. The bespectacled nerd Richie was stupidly ignoring me and looking at his phone. The older among the boys, Bully Stan, looked at me for a long time, and then said mockingly that I was the only one here who looked like a real man. What? I gave him the finger, but accidentally brushed my plate and turned it over. I abruptly jumped out of my seat and pretended that Stan had offended me very much, then quickly went to my room. After closing the door, I immediately called my beloved Carlos. He was just furious and shouted that because of me, he almost got caught by the cops at the border. I begged his forgiveness for 10 minutes. In the end, Carlos relented and gave me one last chance, 2 days later. But he also added that if I didn't come there, it was all over between us. My parents came in without knocking, and I barely managed to hide my phone. After them came Bully Stan and Richie the Geek. The brothers immediately began to apologize for their behavior during dinner. I pathetically said that I forgave them, and then I gave them the finger again. Stan grinned approvingly. And then everyone left. But a couple of minutes later, Richie the nerd returned. He was alone. He blurted out that he wasn't really ashamed, and that I wasn't welcome here. I want to run away from here myself to Mexico. Richie thought for a moment and said he was actually willing to help, so he wanted to get rid of me. Seriously? Richie said it was simple. We just needed to think of a way to get his parents out. But this was for little Mikey. He was folks' favorite and knew everything about them. The next morning, I found Mikey in the backyard. He was very happy to see me, but as soon as I told him about my plan with Richie, Mikey burst into tears and said he wouldn't let me go anywhere. Little Mikey, are you in love? I tried to hug him, but he turned away. Mikey, my friend, if you help me, I'll give you a peck on the cheek. He blushed and asked in embarrassment if I was lying. Then I kissed him on the forehead, considerate in advance. Sighing, Mikey said that his parents wanted to go to one concert this weekend, but all the tickets were sold out. He could Photoshop copies of these tickets. Wow. I handed over the fake tickets during lunch. Parents were just in an orgy of enjoyment. Everything seemed to be going well. Only the older bully Stan was silent. He watched me suspiciously from the other end of the table. After lunch, Stan grabbed my arm near the stairs, pulled me close and demanded sternly that I explain what was going on. He was suddenly so close, his thick hair, the smell of men's perfume, his green eyes. My heart began to beat treacherously and I couldn't even say anything. But Stan insisted on an answer. He knew I was up to something. For some reason, I could not confess to him that I had a boyfriend. Instead, I quickly lied that I allegedly had a seriously ill friend in Mexico. Suddenly, Stan felt a surge of emotion. He said that a good friend of his had just died, and that Stan had never had time to visit him before he died. I'll help you, Stan promised. Before his parents left, I had to steal my passport. Richie the nerd told us that the safe was in their parents' office, but he didn't know the code. Then Stan's help came in handy. It turned out that the parents trusted him as the eldest with the code to the safe. In the evening, when everyone was getting ready for bed, I snuck into my parents' office. Just as I hit the first digit of the code, I heard footsteps approaching. One of the fathers was coming here. I started looking for a place to hide when I heard Stan's voice. He deliberately distracted his father. I hurried to the safe and quickly entered the code. The safe opened. Grabbing my passport, I slipped out of the room, right behind my father and Stan. I didn't believe it, but I did it. Carlos, we'll be together soon. In the evening, I gathered all the guys in my room. I had to decide how to get to the border tomorrow. Stan again volunteered to help and said that he would take me without any problems, and he would borrow the car from his friend. I smiled, and little Mikey mimicked Stan. Was Mikey jealous of me? What nonsense. Yes. Stan, of course, was smart, honest, caring, and handsome. Trying to push these thoughts away, I abruptly told the guys that I wanted to sleep. The escape would be tomorrow. We needed to gain strength. Early in the morning, my parents left for a concert. The bus was only an hour away from leaving for Mexico. I was wildly worried. Constantly looking at the clock, Stan was still missing. Finally, we heard a car horn. Stan! We ran to the car. Stan, in his defense, said that his friends changed his mind about giving the car and he had to steal it. Wow. Stan, it's time. If we don't leave in 5 minutes, we'll be late. Richie the nerd said that I was a great girl. Little Mikey put his arm around my neck and whispered that I wasn't going anywhere without my passport. What did he mean? Then Mikey pointed to the trash can. My passport lay in it, torn into small pieces. Mikey, what have you done? They won't let me cross the border now. That's all. Tears welled up in my eyes. Richie the nerd immediately took his phone and said that he found one point where documents were rarely checked. The bus left there in 10 minutes. I immediately jumped into Stan's car and we drove to the bus. I had never driven so fast, but we made it. At the bus stop, Stan hugged me so tightly that I stopped breathing for a second. That's when Carlos called me. Damn it. I turned away and held the phone to my ear. My love, I'm waiting for you. Where are you? Came from the phone. Stan seemed to hear everything. Without answering Carlos, I dropped the call. Stan, see you. But it was clear from his face that he understood. I started to explain, but he interrupted me and told me to go to the bus. Immediately. With mixed feelings, I boarded the bus full of Mexicans. I suddenly realized that very soon I would be in a foreign country with a man I barely knew. What was I doing? The bus moved slowly. I watched through the window as Stan stole a sad look at me, then got into the car and started the engine. Wait! Stop! The driver braked sharply. I ran out the doors. Tears rolled down my face as I ran as fast as I could to Stan's car. He didn't know what was going on, so he stepped out onto the road and I gave him a big hug. Stan, I don't need to go to Mexico. I wanted to stay here with you. Half an hour later, Stan and I returned home, and Richie and Mikey met us at the door. I hugged Richie. Mikey stood off to the side, embarrassed. He was still ashamed because of my passport. I went over to him and patted his head. You know, Mikey, when you grow up, you're going to find love. In the meantime, you're the best little brother in the world to me. We all hugged together. At this moment, the parents came into the house. It turned out that Phil had a stomach ache on the way and they decided to go back. When Phil and Pete saw us hugging, they said it was great that I finally started loving my brothers. That evening after dinner, Richie took me aside and told me that in the internet, from Carlos's phone number, somebody was looking for girls to work as dancers abroad. This Carlos was a real bandit. And I could have been completely screwed. The nanny called me in the morning. She wanted to know how I was doing. Barely restraining my emotions, I replied in a serious tone that everything was fine. But then I could not stand it. Almost squealing with joy, I thanked her. Thank you, Nanny, for changing my life so dramatically. After all, this time, I found not only a home and a family, but also, it seems, true love. I tried to concentrate and prepare for the exam. It was already in a week. If I didn't pass, I was screwed. Suddenly, my twin brother Leo burst into the room. Hey, you should actually knock. You've got to help me and beat that ugly Ron. You're strong and cool. He blurted out, took out his phone and showed a picture of some guy. Leo, are you out of your mind? Leo explained. The head scumbag of the class, high school student Ron, set a meeting date and place. And now Leo was screwed. He hadn't even fought once. Yes, my brother unfortunately was really a weakling. All he did was learn lessons and read books. Nerd. But I did expect to have to kick his enemy's ass. What had Leo done to run into some scumbag? My brother and I really looked almost alike. The faces were very similar, and we had blue eyes and blonde hair. But the characters were different. I was active since childhood, so my parents sent me to karate lessons, and I was really good at it. Soon, sports became my life's work, and I was transferred to a sports school. But my father gave an ultimatum to pass all the exams for A's. Otherwise, no training, and I just hated studying. Unlike my brother, he was the smartest kid in school but also the weakest. And then I got an idea. If I replaced him, he would pass the exams for me. Bingo! I immediately put a condition on Leo, and he agreed. Okay, fighting was a lot more fun than studying for tests. We shook hands, and the next morning, I was out of my room in Leo's clothes in a bandana with my hair tucked under it. When I entered the school, I immediately felt a push in my back. Hey, Leo, did you find this bandana in the trash? I turned around. There was a cute guy standing in front of me, smiling maliciously. I jumped in surprise. And this was Ron? He didn't even look like a scumbag, but I had to put him in his place. And I gave a cheeky grunt. And in a rough male bass voice, blurted out to him that at least my face was normal. A chuckle ran through his cronies, and Ron stood there, watching me in confusion. He clearly didn't expect this from my brother, but I got straight to the point. So when's the huddle, Ronnie? He narrowed his eyes suspiciously, said that soon, and left. Weakling. I'll show him who's in charge in seconds. The lesson started and the teacher handed out the test results. He said that my brother's and Ron's works were the best. Come on. How did Ron get such results? He was a stupid scumbag. And then some pieces of paper started flying into my back. Hey! What the? I turned around and saw Ron's smug smile. I didn't wait and immediately threw my pencil case in his face. Let him know who he was messing with. You must have a lot of complexes if you bully others, I said, and the class burst out laughing. At this point, the teacher said that if I was so smart, I would probably immediately tell them in what year Columbus discovered America. Hell, I didn't think I'd have to study for Leo. I tried to think of something to say, and then I mumbled something unintelligible. There was a deathly silence in the classroom, and suddenly I realized that I had forgotten to make my voice low. I answered like a girl. I complained of a sore throat and stormed out of the classroom. I ran out of school and sat on the lawn in the backyard to calm myself. My heart was pounding. What if I'd been found out? I was so excited that I didn't even notice the shadow hanging over me. In the next second, someone abruptly picked me up by my t-shirt. It was Ron. He stared into my eyes and vowed to find out why Leo had suddenly become so bold. I quickly pushed Ron away and hurried home. Enough adventure for today. I wanted to distract myself, but when I got home, all I could think about was that idiot Ron. How he pissed me off. He was so smart and he pretended to be someone else. I wanted to kick his ass. In the morning, I looked at the schedule and was shocked. PE would start in 5 minutes. I couldn't change clothes with the guys in the same room. They'd know I was a girl right away. Then I went to the teacher and lied that I had forgotten the gym suit, but then Ron appeared out of nowhere. He smiled mischievously and said that he just had a spare set. Damn, he was bothering again. The teacher nodded, and I had to go to the locker room. Ron threw a bag of clothes at me, then sat down on the bench and stared at me. So what do I do now? I glanced around the crowded locker room and hesitated. Ron was staring at me. I was shaking with excitement. I pretended to have a stomach bug and ran out of the locker room. I rushed to the toilet and only caught my breath in the stall. I decided to change right there. I was about to take off my t-shirt, but my head was stuck in the collar. Then I heard the door to the stall open. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around. Damn, I forgot to close the door. My stomach went cold. I think someone saw me changing. Looks like I got caught. I shivered and immediately imagined how everyone in the gym was laughing that some girl was going to school instead of Leo. A lump rose in my throat. The lesson was only a few minutes away. I needed to collect my thoughts and show everyone that I was not a girl. Then whoever caught me in the booth would definitely change their mind. In class, I did all the exercises perfectly and even did push-ups more than all the guys in the class. No one expected this from Leo, and Ron spent the whole class staring at me. After class, I was standing in my locker getting all my textbooks when Ron suddenly ran up to me and grabbed one of the books. That's it. I swung as hard as I could to punch Ron in the face, but he dodged me, grabbed me around the waist, and pinned me against the lockers. I was scared for a second, and Ron was looking at me sharply. Oddly, I noticed for the first time how deep his brown eyes were. We stared at each other for a few seconds, and then Ron abruptly released me. My heartbeat drowned out all sounds, and my cheeks seemed to be burning. What the hell was wrong with me? I gave him a confused look, grabbed my things, and quickly ran away. I hurried home and plopped down on the bed without undressing. God, did I like my brother's nemesis? Immediately, Leo burst into my room. He kept saying I was the best sister in the world. Wow, what happened? Leo held out his phone and showed messages from girls. You're pretty. It turns out you're so cheeky. Brother Leo was beaming with joy. And for a long time, he thanked me for helping to deal with Ron and also made him popular. It was like something had snapped inside. So now Leo was going back to school and I wasn't going to see Ron again? A lump immediately rose in my throat. Leo was on his way to the door when he suddenly turned around and asked me to go to school for the last time tomorrow. What? Leo continued. We needed to get Ron out of himself, so that he finally set a meeting date in place and then deal with him completely. I nodded my head in confusion. Yes, Leo. I couldn't sleep all night. I decided that I should not give in to sudden feelings. I should hate Ron. He was awful to Leo, so I was going to show Ron where was his place. The next day, I burst into the classroom and immediately wanted to challenge Ron, but he was not there. I ran all over the school, but Ron seemed to have fallen through the ground. Hell, why did he go missing today? I sat down at my desk and tried to read, but all I could think about was Ron. Feelings were raging inside me. He was bullying my brother. I should hate him with all my heart, and all I could think about was Ron. I was so tense that I didn't even notice him barging into the classroom with his friends. I couldn't wait any longer, so I immediately took off and tried to punch him, but Ron dodged me. I was shaking with anger, and he was smiling. How I hate that smile. There was no time to think. It was now or never, and then I saw a package of firecrackers in the hands of his friend. You're pretending to be cool, but can you do this? I shouted at Ron. Anger boiled inside me. I began to lose control of my emotions, and I was carried away. I abruptly snatched the package, lit one of the firecrackers, and threw it at the board. Take it, Ron. Don't brick it. Bang! What an explosion! It seems like the whole class heard it. So what? Do you understand who's the coolest here? I was so proud, but then an angry teacher appeared in the doorway, and he immediately asked, "Who did this?" And then he looked down at the package of firecrackers in my hand and shook with anger. "To the principal! Now!" The teacher yelled so loudly that I flinched. And only now did I realize what I had done. After this, Leo would be kicked out of school, and he could have a bright future if I hadn't messed it up. I was sitting under the principal's office with my head down when I saw Ron at the end of the corridor. He ignored me and went into the office. No, wait! I panicked and ran to the office door. I thought Ron was going to turn Leo in, which was me. But suddenly I heard Ron say loudly that he had thrown in the firecracker. I couldn't believe it. Was he protecting me? Ron went on to say that he had given the package to Leo on purpose and that Leo had taken the blame. I was so nervous that I was about to rush into the office, but the door opened right in front of me, and I buried my nose in Ron's chest. I asked excitedly, "Why did you take the blame for me?" And then Ron reached over to my head and gently took off my bandana. I didn't know what was going on. It turned out that he couldn't believe that Leo had changed so quickly. So he followed me to the bathroom before the class, and he understood everything. He said I was the bravest girl he knew. He didn't think Nerd Leo had such a cool sister. "Yes, but why would you bully my brother?" I asked sharply. Then Ron smiled sadly and said that he had behaved to Leo in the same way that his classmates had behaved to Ron as a child. It was only because of me that he realized how terrible it was. No one respects smart people, and you have to learn to be brave. Ron knew this firsthand. He never wanted to be known as a nerd, so he began to bully everyone around him. And Ron mysteriously added that he was very glad that everything turned out so well with our situation. I was standing there, frozen, when Ron suddenly gave me a timid hug, and a pleasant warmth spread through my body. Ron asked what I was doing tonight. Suddenly, I was overwhelmed with feelings, and I couldn't help it and jumped on him and screamed like a real girl. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you. I carefully climbed through the window. If my mother sees me as a guy, I'm finished. There were footsteps outside the door. I jumped into bed and pulled the covers over me. But my mom didn't even come in, just shouted that she was going on a business trip again. After divorcing my dad, she worked all the time and didn't care about me, and I still wanted to talk to her heart to heart as it was in childhood. The only thing I still had was volleyball. I trained myself for many years. I decided that I would become the best. And a week ago, I was lucky. The principal brought legendary Terrence Smith to the school meeting and announced that he would be our volleyball coach. Smith said he was missing one player on the team. Everyone in the hall whispered, because the students became the best volleyball players. I was determined that the place on the team would be mine. But it turned out that Smith only trained guys. It really pissed me off because I was the best player. Well, if you need a guy, okay, I'll change into him, take a place in the team and become the captain. The selection was tough. I was nervous, and the wig was constantly slipping on its side. There were only 2 of us left, me and the nasty guy Nick. He took me for a rookie and said I might not even hope to make the team. And then our names were called.
Well, let's see who's rookie. I was uncomfortable in my men's short, and the bandages I'd wrapped around my chest got into my skin, but that didn't stop me from beating Nick. And when he left the field, he hissed that he would take revenge on me. But I was no longer listening to him because the coach was walking towards me with a serious face. Suddenly, he smiled and said that I had passed the selection. Yes. Then the team captain, Evan, approached me. All the girls at school were crazy about him. To me, he was just a cocky jock. I would only be too happy to remove him from the captain's chair. Evan congratulated me dryly, but Smith said there was no time to talk. The first practice session would start right away. It turned out that he brought some friends from the state volleyball team to train us before the competition. If you lose, you have nothing to do in this big game, Smith said. During the set, I gave my best along with Evan. He played well, but we still didn't score a single point. At timeout, the boys lied that Evan was asking too much of them. And I decided that I should win the guys over to my side by giving them a break from training. I blurted that in my previous team, the captain always threw cool parties to relieve the tension, and supposedly my friend Alexis was having a party this Friday. If we win, I invite everyone. It was risky, but Mom was away for the whole week. The guys cheered up and we smashed the opponents. Everyone was excited about the party, but Evan didn't like it. He said briefly that he would drop by if he was free and left. Yeah, he obviously didn't like me as Alex. Let's see what he would say about beautiful Alexis. She would be able to find out all his weaknesses to remove him from the post of captain. On the day of the party, the entire volleyball team and Evan showed up. He was clearly in a bad mood. And among them was Nick, the guy from the qualifiers. I was about to protest, but the guy started asking me where Alex was. I did not lose my head and said that he was just late. Evan's expression darkened at the mention of Alex and he walked away. While everyone was dancing, I carefully sat down next to him and asked him why he was so sad, but he didn't answer and began to shower me with compliments. That was nice, of course, but right now, I needed to find his weak spot. Not flirt, I asked if he was just not ready to compete. Then Evan sighed and said that he thought he would soon be moved from the post of captain by an upstart. It's about me. I mean about Alex. Evan said volleyball was all he lived for. His voice faltered. Evan's mom was seriously ill, and maybe she didn't have much time left. Only training saved him from heavy thoughts, and recently, he promised his mother that he would become a better captain, no matter what. It blew me away. I suddenly realized that we were very similar to him. After all, volleyball was also my salvation from problems. But we were interrupted by the cry of someone from the team. Hey, we need to call Alex. He can't ignore his team like that. The phone immediately rang in my pocket, and they all stared at me. I lied that I wasn't feeling well and quickly ran upstairs. I rushed to my room and the phone kept ringing. If I dropped a call, the guys would definitely not forgive Alex. What should I do? I decided to change into Alex. I washed off my makeup and put on my pants and wig, and suddenly the door opened. Nick stood in the doorway. What the hell? He asked me what Alex was doing in Alex's room. I replied that I wanted to appear spectacularly and rolled down the banister from the second floor. Nick grinned enigmatically and left the room. I went to the mirror to adjust my wig and was horrified. A lock of my hair was sticking out from under it. If Nick noticed, I was finished. As promised, I made a spectacular descent from the banister to the first floor. And the guys from the team met me with deafening cheers. They said that the party just rocked and were very grateful for the invitation. But at that moment, the front door opened, and I saw my mother on the threshold. She didn't recognize me as Alex. My legs couldn't move in terror. I had to get back into my clothes as soon as possible. While my mother kicked everyone out of the house, I hurriedly pulled on a dress in the bathroom and then went out to her. She started yelling that I was a bad daughter and didn't appreciate what she was doing for us. For this party, my mother punished me and transferred me to homeschooling, while she worked all day in her room. I couldn't go to training now, and the competition was coming up very soon. What to do? I let everyone down, but suddenly, on the day of the game, Evan called me. He said they couldn't do it without me. I was dumbfounded, so, for the sake of the team, Evan overstepped his pride and called his competitor Alex. I stood for a moment in a daze, but then I came to my senses and decided now or never. I climbed out of the window and ran to the guys. I ran into Evan outside the locker room and just wanted to thank him for calling, as I was surrounded by guys that led to the coach. Hey, what are you doing? They shoved me into his office and Coach Smith told me even though I had been away for a long time, they had decided by a general vote that I was the new team captain. Oh my god, I've been dreaming about it! But then I met Evan's eyes. He lowered his head and silently went to the field. There was a woman in a wheelchair in the front row. And Evan went over and hugged her. It was his mother. She had come to see him, despite her illness. My stomach clenched. I wish my mom was supportive too. When the game started, Evan missed almost all the balls and constantly looked back at the first row, and then I realized that for the two of them, volleyball was more than a victory. Maybe this was their last moments together. Then I decided to screw up the first set and show Evan's mom that he was really a great captain. I sidelined the strongest players and put the weakest in the attack. The guys started making mistakes, and we quickly lost. The team was indignant. The coach told me off and put Evan back as captain. He just lit up. Under Evan's leadership, we quickly rallied and defeated them. While the guys were celebrating, Evan took me aside and thanked me. He knew I'd done it on purpose. But why? I said I wanted to be a captain. But I was sure I still had a lot to learn from him. During the award ceremony, the audience chanted the name of our team. The guys were cheering. And I was happy that I helped Evan. The referee had already picked up the cup and went to the microphone when suddenly, Nasty Nick appeared on the field. He brazenly and unceremoniously snatched the microphone from the referee and loudly declared that the attacker Alex was a liar. The guys looked at me in disbelief, and I cringed. What was he up to? Nick lunged at me and tore off my wig and shouted, "It's a girl!" Evan and the entire team froze in shock. I didn't know where to hide. The judge cleared his throat and said that our victory was annulled due to a violation of the rules. The audience booed and started throwing cans at me. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore and ran away. After this incident, Smith was fired and I stayed at home all day. But one night, someone rang the doorbell. It turned out that Coach Smith came to my house. It was so unexpected. He said that he now worked at another school and offered to become the captain of his women's team. Smith was training girls now and said I was the one who inspired him. I didn't know what to say, but suddenly my mother came out to us. She came up to me and gently hugged me. She heard Smith's words and said that she would support me if I decided to continue training. I almost cried with happiness. It had been so long since we hugged. My mother apologized for not paying attention to me for so long. She regretted it once. She also did not apologize to my father, and he left forever. She didn't want to lose me. As soon as the coach left, I rushed to school. My mom helped me understand that it was never too late to ask for forgiveness. When I ran into the gym, the guys were already going home. Among them, I saw Nick with equipment and a bag of water. I called the guys and said I needed to apologize to everyone, and I understood that I would never regain their trust. But being part of their team was the best thing that had ever happened to me in my life. I started to leave, but Evan stopped me. He said he wasn't angry. He was actually delighted with my bravery. The guys applauded and said that they wouldn't have won without me anyway. After 6 months in Coach Smith's team, I became captain. Evan's mom was on the mend, and he and I hung out all the time. Thanks to the support of my loved ones, I will win many more victories, and I will definitely never feel alone again. The whole flight I thought about the wedding. I was so looking forward to it. I was bringing an expensive dress home, and my fiancé was waiting for me at the airport. To think that I was going to be a wife soon, at this thought, I almost cried with happiness. I'm so sensitive. Suddenly, I was thrown up in my chair by a sharp push. What's going on? The plane leaned heavily down. Oh my god, are we falling?
I woke up on an abandoned beach. In a panic, I quickly checked myself, but I didn't think I was hurt. I looked around. There were rocks with caves and wild jungle. I was scared. I was very afraid of wild animals, and there was no sign of the plane anywhere. But where was the wreckage? That was strange. I started looking for my phone in my pockets, but there was no phone, no wallet, nothing at all. How the hell was I supposed to get in touch with my fiancé? He asked me to always be in touch. He probably was behind himself. When Craig proposed to me, my parents were happy. The rich heiress finally found her prince. Craig reminded me every day that I should be grateful to him. He chose me out of 100 girls. I was very worried, afraid not to meet his expectations. And now, my wedding was only a week away, and I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, hoping to find someone. I wandered along the beach until I noticed a guy in the distance. Hey, I'm here! I ran to him as fast as I could and used my hand gestures to tell him about the crash. Maybe he knew how to get me home. The guy did not seem to understand me very much and only asked in broken English if such a beauty had a groom. Clearly, he was just trying to pick me up. Fortunately, a girl was passing by. She said a few choice words to him and he fell behind. And he's right, you're very beautiful, the girl suddenly said. Come on, I was not even wearing makeup. And Craig wouldn't let me leave the house without makeup. The girl replied that the local guys did not care. There were only 10 girls on the whole island. The others had long since left here. I asked the girl how I could get to civilization. She replied that there was no communication, no police, and only a boatman could take me to the mainland. I was already overjoyed, but then she added that it was worth a fortune. The boatman believes that anyone who wants to leave will find the money. Hell, I don't have a dime in my pocket. What should I do? I was used to living in prosperity and had never worked in my life, but it seemed that I had to do it in this backwater. A group of as many as 6 guys was walking towards us. One of them said something to us. What else did this one want? The girl chuckled, saying that they had a sore point here. The guy would have given anything to pick us up. Are you sure? We're in short supply here. Yeah, there were so few girls here that the guys had one thing on their mind. And then it hit me. What if I opened a course on seduction of women on the island? After all, Craig made me go to women's training. I remembered how they were arranged, and I would make them even cooler. And with the payment of these courses, I could quickly earn money and get out of here. But lecturing on the beach wasn't a big deal. What would the natives think of me? I looked around in confusion. All the bungalows were occupied, but then my eyes fell on the caves. That's right, I saw them on the beach. In one of them, I could conduct classes and at the same time, spend the night there. I needed advertising. I begged the locals for paint and paper, but they brought crushed berries and sheets of papyrus. I drew couples holding hands on them and pasted them all over the island. I hope that the locals will catch the essence and still come to my training. A few hours passed, and I got nervous. Really? No one would come? But then the guy came into the cave. He spoke surprisingly good English and said his name was Rich. He said that, like everyone else, he wanted to learn how to seduce girls and wanted a week of individual lessons. Cool, I could just save up for a boatman and leave. But then Rich added that he needed not just a course on seducing girls, but a course on seducing me. That's where I was really shocked. Whoa. Take it easy, man. I was about to slap him when I saw a bunch of guys heading for my cave. Yeah, my ad worked. I told Rich to get lost. I actually had a fiancé and we were getting married in a week. Rich threw up his hands and left, saying that if I changed my mind, I could find him at the local market. He sold boards for surfing there. I switched to my lesson on seduction. I had drawings of lovers in my arsenal, hearts, a couple of English words that no one seemed to understand, and gestures. I was terribly embarrassed to use them. As a result, the local machos made fun of me, loudly discussing something. The guys left, leaving me with nothing. Well, let them go. Suddenly my stomach rumbled. God, I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. I went back to the bungalow and begged for food from the locals, but everyone refused me. Heck, I saw a couple of stalls nearby. Rich was standing behind one of them, grinning at me. You got it. Trying to maintain my pride, I approached Rich and told him I was ready to start training right now. The first task was to feed me a delicious dinner. Rich said he'd surprise me no problem, but I'd have to blindfold me. Well, I was intrigued. Do it quickly. A
few minutes later, I heard the sound of waves and felt the water under my feet. What was happening? Then Rich pulled off my blindfold and I saw that we were on board in the open ocean. To hell the dinner! I was going to drown here, but Rich supported me and gradually I liked to balance on the waves. Then I remembered my fiancé. Craig considered any extreme a childish nonsense. In the meantime, Rich deftly fished out some fish with a harpoon, and we returned to the shore. There, he quickly fried the fish on the coals with some herbs. I tried it and was stunned. I hadn't eaten that even in restaurants. But I decided not to show Rich my delight. I thanked him dryly and said goodbye. Let him not delude himself. It was already dark, and I went to the cave for the night. But at night, I woke up from the fact that I was literally drowning in the water. A terrible tropical rainstorm began and the cave was flooded. I ran out of it to find cover, but I couldn't see anything. I soon realized that I had wandered into the jungle. Drenched to the skin, I waded through the tropics. Finally, the rain stopped and I could rest. I sat down in the grass, exhausted, when something moved beneath me. I looked down and saw a snake nest. Ah! And then Rich ran up to me. He covered me with himself. Immediately, he picked up a stick and tapped on the ground. Strangely, this calmed the snakes. They began to crawl away. I wondered how Rich had gotten here, but he said he just liked to surf at night. And when he heard my cry, he immediately rushed to help. Rich carried me all the way back in his arms, and I couldn't get over the shock. I kept thinking about how Rich had rushed to my aid in the dark jungle, and suddenly I remembered about my fiancé Craig. Once I was attacked by a dog, and he just ran away. By dawn, Rich had carried me to my cave and carefully lowered me to my feet. At parting, he said that if I wanted, I could spend the night in his house. Not a penthouse, of course, but much warmer. It was so strange. It seemed to me that Rich genuinely wanted to take care of me. Wait, what are you thinking? You have to pull yourself together. The groom is waiting for you. For the rest of the week, I tried not to get too close to Rich. I just lectured him. I was afraid that I would fall under his spell again. And I could not forget about the wedding. So one evening, I decided to check how much I had saved. It turned out that I already had enough money. I'd even stopped counting them since I'd been with Rich. That evening, I went to the boatman's. It turned out that he found out about my successful business and raised the price twice. I begged him to change his mind, told him that I would not have time to earn so much in one day, but he was adamant. Heartbroken, I trudged to the beach and found Rich there. I told him I was willing to give him another lesson, but only if he paid me twice as much. I expected Rich to say no, but surprisingly, he paid and said that he was ready for any task. I was confused and said at random that if he knew me well, he would understand what I needed.
Rich smiled and headed for the bay. I only saw him swim away behind a rock. Rich, what's going on? Where are you? I got excited and went to him in the water, but he was nowhere to be found. And suddenly, I saw him swimming towards me.
Oh, you scared me. I ran over and gave him a big hug, and he took out a mother of pearl shell in the shape of a heart from behind his back. Rich whispered that he had found it at the bottom of the ocean and took my hand. He said he would be happy to see me every day. I blushed in surprise and didn't know how to answer. So I just broke out and ran away. I didn't sleep a wink all night. I thought about Rich and how good it felt to be around him, but he was a savage. I had to marry Craig tomorrow. It was the right thing for me to do. So in the morning, I paid the boatman to leave this island for good. And by noon, I was at the airport. How strange it was to be back in civilization. The people around me were so serious. I even started to miss the wildlife on the island a little. I called Craig from the airport, but the receptionist answered. He bought me a ticket because Craig was busy trying on a suit. A few hours later, I was home, and I tried not to think about Rich and how good it felt to be around him. The guests were already gathered on the porch when I finally saw Craig. But when Craig looked at me, he was furious. He said that I had no right to disappear for a whole week without warning, and that I looked terrible. I started to tell Craig about the crash, but he didn't hear me out. He rudely demanded to clean up and prepare for the ceremony. He didn't care where I was. As long as we looked good in the photos today, I broke down and burst into tears. So it wasn't me that Craig was worried about all this time, just their status. I reached into my pocket for my handkerchief and felt something. Rich's shell. I felt like I was being stabbed. I rushed to my room and took my savings for honeymoon.
Then I ran out of the house, hurry up to the airport. There, I bought a return ticket, and by the evening I was back on the island. I looked everywhere for Rich, but he disappeared in the thin air. And then I looked out at the ocean. In the sunset light, Rich was floating towards me on a board. I ran to meet him and we hugged in the water. Then I realized that Rich had finally achieved his goal. I really fell in love.